Well, on the subject of politics, I thought we could end off by just talking a bit about just what the overall attitude and coverage that has been associated with F1, and not just with Saudi Arabia, but I mean, this is F1 that does races in Bahrain, Azerbaijan, and it seemed to me that one of the few that has spoken openly about this conflict is Lewis Hamilton. That I think it's not so much just like he seems like he is torn between this. Like he sees the moral hypocrisy of this, especially when F1 has positioned itself as sort of a leader here. That is, we have seen with other companies that I think justify their reasoning to go into these countries and make millions and millions of dollars as though it's under the guise of leading as change agents. And is that a real fair assessment of what these outfits are performing in these countries? But sort of like with your ear to the ground, JC, like what is your sense among the F1 audience? Do you think a lot of it is just kind of separation of sport and entertainment versus the real world politics, or is there a convergence of that?
I don't think there's enough talk about it. I don't think there's enough talk about sport washing. Last year with the missile attack, there was a little bit of conversation about driver security, but not a single person that I've read or places I've gone have really batted an eye at the 10-year Qatar deal. Is it? I brought up the exact amount. So Qatar over the next 10 years is going to be paying around $52 million a race.
Wow.
Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix is $65 million. And this is the second year of a 15-year deal. The other thing about Saudi Arabia is around the track, you will see all sorts of Aramco signs. They are a title sponsor of Formula One. They are a title sponsor of the Aston Martin team. They are featured in the video game, and they are the national Saudi Arabian oil company. So we're looking at about $105 million a year coming from Saudi Arabia into Formula One. So there is this overlap between professional wrestling and Formula One in this way, and that WWE and Formula One are both being agents of change in this area while helping a regime wash their abhorrent human rights violations. There is not enough talk about it. There was no talk. I found none. At least with the Qatar World Cup, there were people trying to bring out conversation pieces about, migrant labor and deaths building these stadiums in the desert, and the country's LGBTQ 2S plus rights and all this kind of stuff. And at least during the World Cup, it was there, but there was also that division of, Christian Horner earlier this year when it came to the FIA cracking down on drivers like Lewis Hamilton being able to speak out about, what they believe in and what have not. Christian Horner said, we're a sport. We're here for escape. We're not here to talk politics. And so for those who aren't listening, one, I'm transgender. So I have a little bit more skin in the game than most people in this. Two, I have a background in ethical philosophy. I minored in philosophy and studied philosophy in grad school. And I focused mostly on value theory and ethics. So I have a very, very different analytical approach to this relationship. And it was my background in ethics, and listening to John and Wai as my only connections to professional wrestling that actually brought me back to the forums. And I sent John and Wai a message and about the time around Jay Briscoe's death. And because the way that Post covers these really serious issues, whether it's, WBD or corporate interests, deciphering what's more important, being money over certain avenues and opportunities, that doesn't exist. So I came back and sent a message because I admire the fact that Post doesn't shy away from the tough topics in professional wrestling the way that a lot of media do. I'm not going to finger point, but there's a lot of other wrestling media out there that don't really dig into the Saudi Arabian stuff anymore. At first, when the WWE deal was signed, it was a big deal, but that seems to have dissipated altogether. It just seems to be the standard. Yeah, no, it's just part of the thing. And that's the same thing with Formula One in the Middle East.
And it's the strategy of like that is sport washing at its core, is that it's
perfect.
Just exhaustion from your audience of like, can we just go over the same arguments? And at their core, I think a lot of people, they do want to just enjoy their wrestling, enjoy their race. And listen, I can understand if you are coming at it from that perspective and you don't want to dig into that. No one, I think, wants to sit down and feel guilty about something they consume as entertainment, as a break from the world. I understand that. But I do think when we're speaking about this analytically, like to just divorce ourselves from that would really not be doing it justice when, they are just putting on this is an ability for a WWE to make it's a gigantic increase for their revenue every year. So do not tell me that we are just simply agents of change, because we were not going to this country year after year until the General Sports Authority put a 10-year deal in front of us, and it's profitable for us to be doing these two shows per year.
Yeah, and so Formula One's in a similar situation where recently, the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund tried to put out an idea to buy Formula One for an exorbitant amount, but that's not the first time that's happened. The Qatar did the same thing in 2015. So, and Formula One has a history of you get site fees. So Formula One gets paid to show up places and race. There's local promoters. Yes, they use the same tracks because Formula One, as I've said, is the pinnacle of motorsports. And if you're a promoter, if you want to have Formula One, the circuit that you're using has to be homologated at grade 1, which means it has to be able to deal with everything Formula One. That means you've got to have helicopter air evac, you've got to have certain barriers, if curbs have to be changed, if the track has to be reprofiled. These are things that have to happen before you can put a Formula One car on a track to be safe. Because not all tracks are designed for something like a Formula One car, which, they're very special pieces of machinery. Whereas, you can kind of get away with, yes, the circuits have to be homologated for IndyCar, for example, but it's a whole lot easier when you're doing it through there, and they're not really dealing with the high site fees that Formula One is, and that's a new thing that WWE is kind of getting into, making big events that they get paid a large site fee to bring the spectacle to, and that's part of that exhaustion. Like the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix is a spectacle. It looks gorgeous. The track it was safer this year, but it's fast. If you play it for like a racing simulator, it is fun to drive. However, I don't think that as an ethical consumer of any product, you should just willfully put your head in the sand for enjoyment over because you might be violating your own moral code, but that's where morals and ethics are different, because you might have a moral code that says I believe in this, but based off of what ethical approach you're using, it's actually not the most ethical approach here. While it's your personal morality, and we'll get into this, while it's your personal morality, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is the ethical right choice for the greatest good for all. However, one of the things that I was speaking about in the message to John Wai was the social contract theory. So social contract theory is essentially you play by the rules that the society sets. And that's kind of what we're doing here with Saudi Arabia and Formula One. One of the things I have to do as a transgender person who loves Formula One is I literally have to grapple with the fact that something I love does not care about the $80 I give them a year. They don't give a shit about me. This there's the how many Formula One fans are on the Pacific Coast? There's probably a fair amount, but not enough that like we're a major data point for Formula One. So they don't care about me. They can we race as one when social, like they definitely jumped on the on on the various social movements that came up during the pandemic and
When George Floyd was killed, I mean,
when
that was
George Floyd
something
was
that
killed.
was,
Yes.
it very much like it was a tragedy, but it was political. But it was also one
Yes.
that was, in certain senses, like to me, you can not just say, oh, sports and politics, they always
They
intertwine.
always
But there's
mix.
times
Always.
that it's convenient when we see things like the NFL that is promoting the military, and that is considered patriotic. That is very much political, but that's on their terms. It's not politics being forced to be confronted by your audience or by the power brokers in that league.
And it's a little bit easier when you're presenting something political that's supposed to be patriotic positive, right? Like for a lot of your audience, that patriotism is going to be, especially American football, like that patriotism is going to fuel into nationalism and pride. Whereas if you're watching a global sport, you, like you said, you don't want to sit down and be like, okay, so what's been going on in Saudi Arabian human rights recently before I watch this race? And that's why, I think when you're engaging with, whether it's WWE, whether it's Formula One or boxing, like maybe you're really into Tyson Fury. Well, Tyson Fury does a lot of fights in Saudi Arabia because they pay him a lot of money. So from that aspect, from a financial aspect, the ethical choice for Tyson Fury is to take the money and go fight in Saudi Arabia. But I have a different ethical choice because it's my lifetime, my attention, and my money and my enjoyment I'm putting into this product. And I have to make the decisions whether or not I can support something that is very, very intertwined with a region and areas of the world where the social contract exists, where those areas of the world aren't necessarily friendly to me, and I'm not necessarily welcome without, you know, having higher than normal concerns for safety. And I'm somebody who, I don't care where you're born. I don't care what you believe in. I don't care about any of that. Nobody anywhere on the planet at any time should ever, and I get socioeconomic systems, I get all this, but when you look at it from a fundamental level, there is no way anybody on the planet who's pursuing happiness should be in fear of their safety, whether it's in a rundown neighborhood, in an impoverished neighborhood that doesn't have the social programs and is designed to be what it is through words on paper. There's that going on, and then you've got Saudi Arabia over here where, while I don't fear walking through slums of North America, I don't fear for my safety really anywhere in a lot of places in the world. Like, listen, no matter where you go, when you're transgender, no matter where you go, like, you never know what you're going to get from people, because you might be the first transgender person that they meet, that they've ever seen. Like, you just don't know what reaction people are going to give you. And most people are really good. Most people are really nice, but there are some regimes and areas of the world that have less than stellar reputations for human rights. And so one of the things, and I go back to the social contract theory, while I play in their social contract, and I would love to go to Saudi Arabia. I have this wanderlust, and I would love to see Saudi Arabia for real. Like, I would love to be there, but I know that I can't go there. I know that if I was credentialed media for Formula One, there are a couple of races I couldn't go to. Could I go to Bahrain? Maybe. Could I go to Abu Dhabi? Maybe, but like Qatar, I can't go to Qatar. I can't go cover Qatar. I can't go cover Saudi Arabia just because there is that increased jeopardization of my safety based off of an area where the social contract is. This is not necessary. Like if you're in the 2S LGBTQ plus or LGBTQ 2S plus, whichever way you want to do it, wherever you are under the rainbow flag, when there's certain areas that are inhospitable to you, you kind of have to, you develop a thick skin and you have to make choices. And so I make the ethical choice to play by the social contract theory when it comes to Formula One. And so I get why, from an economic standpoint, it makes all the sense in the world to take all the money from Saudi Arabia, from Bahrain, from $50 million from Qatar for $500 million in a 10-year deal from Qatar. Okay, sure. Because a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of that could change my life radically forever. When we're talking like a fraction of a fraction, whereas for Formula One, it's standard issue. I don't like the hypocrisy of, I don't think that when you're engaging with these places, telling the drivers, putting restrictions on what the drivers can say and do and how they can present themselves, I don't think that's right. And those are rules that kind of came in this year. And I think that one of the things that we as consumers have to do, especially when it comes to sport washing, is you have to engage with that ethical, not moral, but like the ethical dilemma of, I support something. So if you openly, maybe you have people under the rainbow flag in your family, or you have friends and you're openly supporting them, how can you deal with that hypocrisy of, you love this thing and they engage with this, yet, it's counter to what you actually believe in. And like, as Wai's brought up here, Lewis Hamilton has been at the forefront of that. And, if you are somebody who's into words and you're into reading things and reading between the lines, some of the recent rulings that the FIA has come down on with not being able to speak out about certain issues, or down to like driver jewelry, what the drivers can wear in the cockpit. For all the Formula One fans out there who are listening to this, close your eyes and tell me how many drivers you see actively wearing jewelry in the car. I can name one, and it's Lewis Hamilton, because you can see his nose ring. When the visor goes up, you can always see his nose ring. So why is it now that piercings aren't allowed in a Formula One car under safety? He's been racing with it forever. So why is it in 2022 with a new FIA president that there's this crackdown? And, if you're a conspiracy theorist, it's really easy to sort the tea leaves and be like, well, there's more. The FIA, Formula One, and the teams are far more integrated with Saudi Arabia and Qatar and these regimes than maybe we think, and maybe they influence some of the sponsorship decisions. Maybe they influence some of the like these rules that, like, does it really matter if he's got a nose ring in while racing? Like, how is that a safety issue? Like, if you want to
control issue, that is what it is. It is just,
and so
to me, it is certainly someone I have a great deal of respect for. That one of the issues is that, for whether we are talking about wrestlers in WWE, in this case, drivers in F1, it is easy to just ignore it. It is easy to rationalize it, and much more difficult to state, I am not going to go on that tour of Saudi Arabia that a few have opted out of. It is hard to be a Lewis Hamilton that is going to take time at a press conference to bring about this issue, as opposed to saying, oh, that's above my pay grade, I'm just here to drive. Like, that's easy. That's an easy response. And I'm not going to condemn those that lean on that, but I'm going to certainly applaud those that opt to take the much tougher path of calling this stuff out and stating that a campaign, it needs to be more than that. A campaign can't just be this pacifier so your audience feels okay with this. Oh, they are behind this. When, what are the actions? Do the actions meet up with the words? And that is what a person like Lewis Hamilton is holding to account.
Yeah, like kind of the phrase, the colloquialism, when the rubber meets the road, right? The W13 had prodigious downforce in the wind tunnel, yet when the rubber met the road, theory didn't pan out in reality. Whereas, theory can kind of guide how you evaluate these situations, and you can pretend like things are getting better through sport washing, because it's like, look at all these people in the stands. They seem happy. Everybody seems happy. Everybody's having a good time, and when none of those issues are brought up, if you don't know, you don't know something. And for how many people watching F1 around the world don't actually know about these issues. And while maybe it doesn't need to be on the main broadcast, like it wasn't brought up in practice. None of this was brought up in pre-race anything. And I think the only way that there's no way to hold, unless somehow magically I ended up with billions of dollars, there's no way that I can have any influence, or us, the three of us, can have any influence on Formula One's decision to take the most money. We can't, because they're here to make the most money. Each of the teams are trying to be profitable. Each of the teams are not just trying to survive for the next season now. They're invested. And so everybody should kind of have to grapple with the fact that, ethically speaking, if you support a cause, you should not, like, there's so many arguments against me supporting Formula One. It's a lot because of the sport washing. And when you don't talk about sport washing, it goes away. And so I said this the way earlier, but one of the things as a historian that I've said that some people get right away, some people are shocked by, and it's very simple and it's going to sound very straightforward, is that words have material consequences. Whether you say them, whether you write them, whether you codify them in law, they have material consequences. And so we have parts of North America that on the books today are still laws that say that this area should be segregated because somebody codified that into law, and that affected people's lives dramatically for a very long time and still does today. When it comes to Saudi Arabia, and Qatar and these places with human rights issues, Chris had mentioned they went to South Africa during apartheid. Well, there was a chance that South Africa was coming back on the calendar this year. They do go to China. They do have, well, they have gone to China in the past. It's been canceled the last 3 years. But you have this issue where I think you should always be an informed consumer. And that's part of the social contract. Is I think that everybody should be informed that you are partaking in sport washing. I am actively partaking in sport washing. I don't like it. It's morally, against what I believe, but ethically, if I'm looking at this if I want to participate in the sport I like, I have to agree to the social contract that F1 and these regimes are putting out there, saying, if you want to enjoy this and support this, this is coming with it. And while I'm in the middle of writing a piece about this, applying different ethical lenses to this concept of sport washing and then how it practically can play out in the world, kind of like a Formula One philosophy experiment. It's one of those things where there's not enough conversations. I don't think there's enough fans who care. There's not enough media covering it, which is one of those things why I admire y'all so much for not shying away from the tough topics, because unless you go to more independently driven content or outlets, you're not going to find that coverage. You are not going to find coverage of sport washing really on ESPN or The Athletic or F1's stuff. Like they didn't talk about sport washing at all on F1 TV. And I speak to F1 TV's virtues, but like that is something that they don't talk about. And
well, they're owned by F1, are they not?
F1 TV, yeah. But but still, Will Buxton is considered a journalist. even though he works for F1 TV. So, if there was anybody on that panel who works for F1 TV who has that kind of credentials of being a journalist and asking questions and writing and getting that respect coming up through different categories of motorsports, it's Will Buxton. And Buxton could be one of the people that even if it's a mention, it doesn't have to be like a diatribe. It doesn't have to be like us talking about it and talking about social contract theory. And, well, if you look at this theory about harm reduction, like it doesn't have to be any of that. Like it can just be, something to get people to read, to explore on their own, because there aren't enough conversations about sports washing. It is just a part of it. Like Bahrain's 20 years now. So like there's not, Bahrain is just Bahrain.
So it's worked, basically. The sport washing
it's worked in the Formula One world, but maybe this will, I remember a little bit during the, leading up to the deal, there was a little bit of conversation about it, but once the deal was struck, it went to the back burner. And, this was the third Saudi Arabian race. The missile attack was brought up during practice sessions in 2022, but there was no talk about sport washing. There was none of that, but they had to deal with the real issue that was in the news at the time and speak to it. Whereas sport washing is this concept that, while it's actively happening and you're participating in, it's not like we're having active dialogue or news stories about it popping up to grab people's attention.
It's difficult because there's no maybe urgency attached to it. It's something that is, prolonged and it takes effect after, several years. I will say, I think it calls to the importance of having these sort of conversations, because that's how I think we can at least attempt to reverse the effects of sport washing by, maybe drawing attention to Saudi Arabia and F1's association with it. It's giving people like me and John a chance to understand, just how far deep an F1 is, or how much Saudi Arabia is paying, to try to get things like these in their press. And I would say in turn, maybe it's having a bit more of a negative impact on my perception of Saudi Arabia, or I should say maybe more realistic, which might be more negative as well. So I think conversations and maybe demand for these conversations from the audiences that are, taking in this sort of coverage is really important.
And you writing about this as well, JC, like I would argue that like if your decision was like, I can't participate in this industry that is trying to exclude me in parts of the world, well, that is a less richer dialogue. That's a voice that would not be contributing in F1. I think you would be doing a disservice if you were to say that F1 is too toxic for me to write about, because there are few that are doing it.
Well, I mean, to speak to the professional wrestling side of this, like, because this is a pro wrestling site, like I don't watch professional wrestling anymore, and I hear there was an incredible Vikingo Kenny Omega match that I would love to watch, but I've been so far out of it because, one, I'm bored. Two, I don't want the toxic element in my life anymore. I said on the board ages ago and deleted the post, professional wrestling fans have a Twitter problem. And just there's a toxic element in anything. Like there's a toxic element in the heavy music world, right? It doesn't matter what it is. There's a toxic element. It's just about how much control that toxic element has within the sphere. And I couldn't anymore deal with the toxicity from the tribalism and even people who are fans, the toxicity towards things going on within the promotion, and like kind of being blind to, while accentuating the negatives and, not necessarily focusing on the positives equally. And so if I was to walk away, and like, we're talking 30 years, like I know pro wrestling, kids, like, like it's been a long time. And so for me to walk away from something that I've loved and decide that my only engagement with this thing that I've loved for over 30 years, I have been driven away by never really finding that community. And then I stick around because I love what you're doing at Post, and you're all that I really need. So you've kept me in, but I'm still out. Like I can't be bothered to go find this Kenny Omega Vikingo match, even though I would love to watch it. A former me would love to watch it. I'm not at that point with Formula One yet. And it's not because I make money from it. I mean, I'm excited for a NASCAR race, which is the first time I've ever said that in my life, because it's at Circuit of the Americas, which is a Formula One track. I love that track. So this being my first year of covering NASCAR, I'm very interested to see how all three series of NASCAR deal with a circuit designed for Formula One. Not banked ovals, none of this crap. It's a Formula One track. It is a grade one designed for Formula One track. And I love watching other categories try to tackle these super technical Formula One tracks. Could the toxicity of sport washing drive me away from Formula One if it drove me nuts enough? Yeah, and that would break my heart, because then I'm losing two things to toxicity that I've loved my whole life. I have a problem with the NHL right now, and players not understanding that. I get that you believe what you believe in, and I'm happy for that, and I'm happy that you have family and community and support, and you've found love and growth and all this positivity from whichever communities that you are in. But by simply putting some bloody rainbow tape on your stick, by wearing a pride jersey, it doesn't say that you're endorsing me existing. It's saying that you respect me as a human and my choice towards happiness. That's what it says. And that's what I don't care what, the Chicago Blackhawks released a statement. I think it was the Blackhawks, fearing for the safety of their players who are from certain areas of the world, being Russia, and the Russian Orthodox Church's take, an increasing take on the 2S LGBTQ plus community. And so the Blackhawks on their Pride Night just decided, for the safety, in their press release, for the safety of our players, we're not going to wear these Pride jerseys in warm-ups. You're not even wearing them during the game. And it's just the one thing that anybody within the community, with under the rainbow flag, could ever want. You don't have to agree, and it doesn't have to be a part of your moral code, but ethically, as a human, respect. Like, that's it. Like, respect us as humans, because we're, love is love. You pursue happiness. Like if you had a conversation about me and transitioning, you would be shocked at my path to this. I'm blown away by it, but I'm significantly happier. So I made the ethical right choice for me. And because it doesn't align with your morality doesn't mean that it's not the ethical right choice. And supporting respect of people, you don't have to endorse. If it goes against your religious beliefs, you don't have to endorse. And if you believe in a religion that's a state-run religion that actually jeopardizes your safety when you go there, I just said nobody should be fearful for their safety anywhere they go in the world. So I don't care if you're a hockey player or you're just some random person. Like, doesn't matter where you are, you shouldn't be in fear for your safety. And so I have to fight this multiple times a year where nobody talks about sport washing. I'm here with my ethical hat on, working through different theories. And it always comes back to because social contract theory is kind of prevalent. You have to abide by the social contract theory, because in our world, the human animal created currency. Currency, economics, we created as animals. Congratulations. It now dominates our world. Something we created literally dominates our world and separates people from being able to have access to clean drinking water and not, which if you don't have clean drinking water, you will die. It is a fundamental necessity of life to have clean drinking water. And we have an economic system that says if you can't pay for it, you can't have it. And I ascribe to an ethical theory that says you treat people as an ends in and of themselves, not a means. I still haven't found an argument that deflates Kant's magnus opus right there, because you don't treat people as a tool. You treat them as the valuable thing in and of themselves. They're not a hammer. They're the table. They're the couch. They're the thing at the end of the process. They're the valuable thing. They're not a part of the process to get to the valuable thing. That's what I ascribe to. And when it comes to Formula One, they don't care. And sport washing is working. And it's working in Formula One. And it has worked. And they don't have these conversations. And I'm seeing actively within the professional wrestling world, there's not enough. I have seen that same kind of dissipation of the conversation. And, I reached out to y'all because you don't shy away from those conversations. And, I would say that me reaching you, inspiring me to reach out to you, thanking you for saying things and making my voice, which it was never heard in the professional wrestling world, making my voice heard on something to at least two people who care enough from a journalistic point of view that this story needs to be out there for people to at least grapple with, and then move on from. Once you've grappled with it and you've done your ethical evaluation, okay, then you don't have to think about it again. Sure, fine. But ethically for me, morally for me, like, I'm going to struggle with it. I'm going to, until like I can go to Saudi Arabia and be me, like, I'm going to grapple with it. And I don't know, like, will I ever see that day? I hope so. Like, I truly hope so. Like, but the only way I think that we can do that is by shining the light on the activities that are literally blinding us to, things that are happening that you would not want anybody to go through, regardless who they are. Like, human rights violations are human rights violations. And if you have empathy towards another human, like, you can really easily rationalize, like, well, I don't want anything bad to happen to that person. But because they live in a certain area, maybe they can't pursue happiness like I can. Because don't tell me there's not people in restricted areas of the world where they would pursue happiness a little bit differently if they had the opportunity. I'm legitimately an academically trained historian. I'm telling you right now, that's a fallacy. Like, LGBTQ, this is not something new. It's not something that came about in the 60s. This is something that's been going on forever and a day. Like, two-spirit concept is something that's throughout indigenous cultures. But in other parts of the world, like, that's just not going to fly. And until the day where John and Wai could bring their families to Saudi Arabia, and I could tag along in their luggage, and we all go to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, and none of us have to worry about a single thing, and everybody's happy, everybody's having a good time. There's no potential missile attacks on a bloody oil field a couple of miles away from the racetrack. Like, that'll be a beautiful day. But until then, like, I will always grapple with the ethics of supporting something that doesn't necessarily supports me, but supports this thing that is against, my path in life. And that's a struggle.